Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I want to give you a brief welcome before we get started. I'm Maya Lenevsky, the Events and Outreach Manager here at the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society with the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. The ACMHE is a multidisciplinary academic association with a membership of over 700 educators, staff, students, and researchers committed to the transformation of higher education through contemplative methods. The ACMHE is an initiative of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society. I'd like to welcome you all to our April 2018 Contemplative Education webinar, Knowing and Growing, Creating and Sustaining Contemplative Communities with Stephanie Briggs. Now I'd like to give you a little background about our lovely presenter. Stephanie Briggs is an assistant professor of English at the Community College of Baltimore County. She utilizes arts-based practices to foster community, social action, and compassion among her students. She also facilitates the Contemplative Community Circle for faculty and staff and received a Center for Contemplative Mind and Society Building Communities grant for her initiative titled Practical Empowerment, Building Contemplative Communities with Students of Color. In addition to her roles at CCBC, she is the owner of Be Still Move, a facilitated training program of mindful and contemplative embodied movement and arts-based learning. The programs are designed for educators, health professionals, nonprofit organizations, and corporations. Be Still Move is a transformative tool for those who desire to have a deeper understanding of themselves and others. We are extremely excited to have her with us today. Please welcome Stephanie.
Thank you so much, and good day, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society and the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education for this wonderful opportunity. And particularly, I'd like to thank Maya and Carrie for their continued support. So once again, welcome, and let's begin. So I'd like to take a moment to open with a short meditation. If you're in your office or at home or in a space that is surrounded by distractions, if there's a way just to close the door and allow for a call or two to go unanswered, that would be wonderful. But if that is impossible, I understand. So first, get in a comfortable position, sitting firmly, making contact with whatever is beneath you. Your gaze can be soft, focusing downward and about 4 feet in front of you. Or if you are comfortable, you can close your eyes. So let's begin by taking a deep breath in and letting it out slowly, releasing any tension you might have. Again, take a deep breath in and release it slowly. Now return to your normal breathing. And what I ask you to do today is very simple. I want you to take all the concerns that you have regarding your work, your boss, your president, your chair, your dean, your students, the administrative assistant, any staff member. And all I want you to do is gather them all up and head towards a door and place them outside of that door. They'll be safe. Just leave them there. And concerns you might have about your family, your spouse, your partner, your children, your brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all of those who are your blood relations. Just gather them all up and place them outside of that door. They'll be safe. And just leave them there for the time being. And your friends, your best friend, your sister friend, your brother friend, the neighbors, the person who sits opposite you in the office, all those folks that you see day in and day out, the ones you love, the ones that get on your nerves, the ones you're concerned about. Gather them all up and place them outside of that door. They will be safe. And finally, your pets, your cats, dogs, birds, gerbils, all the beings that are in your life, two-legged, four-legged, winged. Gather them all up and just place them outside. They'll be safe. And now what I want you to do is close the door. And be here and now. Here and now. Thank you. My focus today will be on offering some basic steps based on my own personal experience for setting up contemplative communities on your campuses. Much of my design is based on the fact that self-care is the basis of any and all contemplative work that we do. By engaging in personal practices, of which there are numerous ones, we will achieve the personal transformation necessary to compassionately and empathetically incorporate practices into our courses. Knowing and growing. Today's talk is based on the building blocks of the work that we have done at the Community College of Baltimore County. Plus, I have added ideas and thoughts from colleagues from other institutions. It's important to note that this is simply a guide, and that it is important to be attuned to the needs of your specific groups. This webinar will be divided into 3 sections: getting started, the first meeting, holding the space, and maintaining a loving and compassionate environment. After each section, you'll have the opportunity to share your questions, or actually you can do this while I'm speaking, and also to make any suggestions you might have to add to what I am offering. The Community College of Baltimore County's Contemplative Community Circle is about to complete our second year. We are a group of 20 with a mailing list of 50, but 20 regularly attending faculty and staff members from a variety of departments: English, math, wellness, psychology, sociology, performing arts, and sciences. The goal was to place our attention on our personal needs through self-care practices and focus on the value of developing individual regular practice. Therefore, we spend the majority of our time meeting once a month for 1.5 hours, focusing on practice. At the end of each semester, we discuss possible practices we would like to share with our students based on what we've learned and experienced. But this is not a requirement of our community. Getting started. So I'm going to give you an idea of what led to my desire to create a contemplative community. In 2014, I was granted a sabbatical that investigated the impact of contemplative practices on underprepared African American students. Then, in the fall of 2015, I facilitated a year-long contemplative pedagogy faculty learning community through our college's Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. 11 faculty members participated. We used as our text Contemplative Practices in Higher Education, Powerful Methods to Transform Teaching and Learning by Daniel Barbizat and Mirabai Bush. At the end of the fall semester, each group member submitted a proposal of a practice they planned on instituting in their classes. At the end of the spring 2016 semester, at our Faculty Learning Communities mini-conference, the group presented their classroom design and assessments via poster presentations to an audience of about 30 faculty, staff, and administrators. In addition, during the spring of that year, I offered a 3-session introduction to contemplative practices for faculty and staff. About 20 people attended that session. Also, in the spring of 2016, I had the pleasure of receiving a fellowship from the Fetzer Institute and the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society to join with several dozen institutions in discussions on building contemplative communities on college campuses. And this is when things really changed for me. I realized this was an opportunity for me to begin recruiting potential faculty and developing my own contemplative community group. My recruitment then included individuals I met through the teaching and learning projects, as well as doing a bit of shameless promotion at the college's end-of-year professional development conference, where I attended 2 sessions, one on contemplative photography led by an adjunct photography professor I met during my 3-course session, and another presentation given by 3 members from my faculty learning community who shared the practices and results of incorporating mindfulness practice into their psychology and sociology classrooms. So what I did was take the opportunity during these campus-wide professional development sessions to speak at the end of each of these presentations. And I basically said, if this experience feels right, then you might as well sign up for our newest group called Contemplative Community Circle. And then I simply passed out a yellow notepad and collected emails and began emailing the group closer to the beginning of the fall semester. So here are some possible recruiting options. Simply reaching out to like-minded colleagues, which you'll be surprised are far more than you expect. Designing faculty learning communities. Workshops offered in your centers for teaching and learning. Offering brown bag lunch series. In-house newsletters. Campus wellness departments, and professional development events. So based on what I had done because of my sabbatical and actually offering a lot of professional development within a year's time. By the fall of 2016, I had 20 interested and curious individuals who came to our first gathering in September. Roles and goals. As I indicated earlier, our group meets once a month on Fridays for 1.5 hours with colleagues traveling between 3 campuses. This is not what they enjoy doing. So their willingness to hop on the Beltway without complaint to join the first gathering was pretty amazing. So it was most important to me that I find an open space that could be transformed into an inviting environment and large enough for us to be in circle. So our first meeting, I opened with the meditation that I shared with you earlier. Because by doing this, it establishes ground rules about the importance of being present and leaving all other issues safely placed outside of our immediate environment. So I recommend having a series of introduction practices, particularly if you choose to have an open door policy, as we do, as we allow people to join our group at any time during the semester. This provides a great opportunity for the group to introduce itself and for the new member to feel comfortable, and then at the same time establishing the guidelines. So here's a list of practices our group did during our first year together. We had meditation, journaling, art and drawing, gratitude practice, movement, play. We walked the labyrinth, which is a wonderful thing we have on one of our campuses, beautiful outdoor labyrinth, and then also martial arts and Tai Chi. It's also good, I think, to share the contemplative tree with the group to aid in the creative process. This is a really helpful tool as it allows folks to see the wide range of practices and that they often get a chance to notice that there are practices they already do in the classroom that are indeed contemplative in nature. So now I'll get to answer a few questions, if there are any, or any suggestions based on these sort of basic ideas of just getting started with a community.
So attendees, this is the time to enter some questions, and I see them popping up now. So the first question that came in was, does CCBC have a campus ministry? If so, how do you involve campus ministers? The person asking the question is a Presbyterian pastor in a college town who does some ministry on campus, would like to start something like this and know some professors and staff.
Okay, we actually have an interfaith center. We have interfaith centers on our campus. We've just begun working with the Interfaith Center. They are run by our student life, and they have been quite receptive to what we're doing. We are actually offering, hopefully in the fall, some workshops or practices that we can share with the students in the space. But that's what we do have on our campus. So that has been, they've been quite welcoming of what we're doing.
Thank you. I'm actually also seeing that the table exercise that we just caught a glimpse of the slide, it seems that we didn't actually get to talk about that in detail before we cut out. I'm getting a few people asking about that.
Okay, well, I'll just back up a little bit so you can see that slide. So what we did was we had our first meeting. I asked anyone who was planning on attending to bring an item that was representative of some story they held that was important to them. and they were to bring that item with them. I gave them no additional information, just to bring the item. And then after we did our practice, our opening practice, I asked each individual to share the story of the item that they brought. So they were to introduce themselves just by their name and then to tell their story. And so once their story was told, then they would actually leave the circle, place the item on the table, and then sit, and then the next person would tell their story. So we went in circle telling the stories of our items. And the final vision was this table that we were able to walk around and spend some time with what we had learned.
Thanks, Stephanie. And then the next question I'll read is, I'm curious if you discuss the spiritual and religious backgrounds of these practices.
That's a good question. I'll talk about this a little bit. What I started with was just basically talking about self-care. So my initial goal was, how do we care for ourselves in order to engage with our students, and that there were a number of practices that were available to us that we can use. So I didn't discuss the origins of practice, because also I wanted it to be open enough to anyone who had any sort of faith-based belief that these practices could come from many places. So focusing on self-care was the safe way. And then I began offering something like the tree, which sort of carries so many approaches to contemplative practice that most could see something of themselves on those branches. As time went on, we spent a little more time on the history of practice, but I think practice is sort of the origins are hard to identify, because the origins from an African American perspective, or spiritual wisdom practice, is different from a Buddhist wisdom, and different from someone who has a different view, maybe nature-based practice. So it's a little challenging. It's something that I think once you are clear on who is in your group, you might choose to talk about this from an Eastern perspective, but I find that can sometimes be problematic for people in the group. So I think it's playing it a little safe to keep it open, and that's why I love the tree. I think the tree allows for a richer approach to engagement with the idea of contemplative practice.
Okay, so I think we'll just do one more question for this section, and then maybe be able to revisit some of these later. The next and last question, what role, if any, do staff and student services play in this process? Do you believe you would have received this reception had the initiative been implemented first by student services?
I'll talk a little bit about this. I was a little bit of a renegade in determining how we were going to institute the practices. I personally, this is a personal belief, that it's important to establish a sense of your own practice, and that once you have that, and within our group that was our goal, and what's happening now for our third year, we're going into our third year, that we will be working more with student services and students, but I think that we can have a better engagement or be better engaged with this population because of our own practice. And so we spent the first year in just understanding that we did have practice, we did have something that we could share. And then our second year, we started to offer up various practices in our own classes. And I think this third year, we have a sense of what it is to be in practice, what it is to be present with our students and to engage in creating student groups. And because I really wanted this to be a group practice and not an individual, i.e. me, being that person, this opens up a lot more venues and a lot more opportunities because we have more people who can speak to this. And also we have 3 main campuses, so we have some other challenges as well. So I hope that answers that question a bit.
That was the last question for this section.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this idea of holding the space. When you hold space for someone, you bring your entire presence to them. You walk along with them without judgment, sharing your journey to an unknown destination. Yet you're completely willing to end up wherever they need to go. You give your heart, let go of control, and offer unconditional support. Lynn Hauke. I like to say that I facilitate, and then I also like to say that we facilitate, and then that the group facilitates. I chose facilitation as a format as it offers up the opportunity to make something happen and to be open to shared and sharing experiences, which were an important part of our building this community before we even took it out to our students. Therefore, in the beginning of our first meeting, I facilitated the first 2 sessions, and then I opened it up to members of the group to facilitate, because I really believe that once people have a voice and feel comfortable with sharing these practices, then we expand. So we discovered much about our group. There were people who were yoga instructors, because you have to understand, I didn't know most of the people in the group when they came. And we had people who had established long-term practices, with one faculty member leading the most wonderful session for an hour and a half on the practice of gratitude. So by the second semester together, members of the group were more comfortable and were safely willing to try out new ideas. We also had times where in our sessions of 1 hour and a half, we would have 2 or 3 facilitators at a time. But the goal was to make sure that facilitation was something that each member had the opportunity to experience. And in order for this to happen, it's really important to be both flexible and open. Space. As I mentioned earlier, space is important. Therefore, prior to entering a space, I feel it's important for it to be held as sacred space. So even if someone else is facilitating, I will generally go to the space an hour earlier and, or try to get to the space an hour earlier and sort of hold that space. Personally, I try to find a room with windows and enough space to sit in circle, but sometimes these spaces are hard to find. But since our group meets on a Friday, that generally offers us more options in where we could meet. And a note on Friday meetings: the first few months, our members were not happy about Friday, but a funny thing happened around the 4th month. There was this realization that what we had was like a sanctuary, and one person shared that our gatherings grounded her so that she could get through the rest of the month. So the need for self-care being our first and foremost bit of responsibility was what allowed us to grow, and having sacred space also was nurturing space. Generally, we've kept our gatherings on campus, but and I think faculty like that because of convenience. But I will say that during our 2 years together and having held 2 off-campus retreats, our group is beginning to see the benefit of time together in a nature space. Making space practice involves arriving early to establish a peaceful and calming environment. And this can be done by bringing fresh flowers, making a homemade dish to share with the group, and or sitting in silence with music, or with music before everyone arrives. But what's important is holding the space. I think this will address one of the questions we had earlier about campus affiliations. Like I said a little bit earlier, when I started our community, I was a bit rogue because I desired their freedom to experiment without constraints. But I do believe that legitimacy through affiliation is important, and being aligned with an established campus group or organization that aligns with your values and mission is key. So this could include organizations or groups looking at learning outcomes or culturally responsive instruction. And it's nice to have that tie-in to a theoretical framework. So possible campus affiliations are student services, multicultural affairs, health and wellness departments, or interfaith services. These groups might also offer some financial support, as well as the ability to have accessibility to grants and funding. Outside affiliations are also helpful, and sometimes working with campus affiliations, campus groups can have access or offer access to on and off-campus venues. In my case, I have been fortunate to have access to several lovely day retreat centers that are either free of charge to nonprofits or request a small donation. We've also had outside facilitators as well, including Michelle Chapman, who you see at the bottom there, who assisted in guiding our group at the end of our first year towards our second year mission of justice, compassion, and self-care. Engaging practice. So engaging practice offers ways in which the group can stay focused on the importance of practice when we aren't meeting, as well as keeping them informed on what is going on in the field of contemplative pedagogy. I chose not to overburden my group with emails or homework. And I also made the choice not to have a textbook or assigned reading. And I'm going to tell you, this kind of freedom was difficult for a number of people at the beginning. So to offset that discomfort, from time to time, I would send out articles via email. And I'm going to say that what is wonderful about having others in the group facilitate is that they have the freedom to conduct the sessions as they would like. And if they wish, they can assign readings or a text. So I think by offering up the group an opportunity to do their own facilitation, we see a lot of variations on how we learn. And I think we approach this so everyone has the opportunity to maybe engage in something that's familiar to them. One way I chose to engage practices was to periodically send out emails that told the group to drop everything they were doing and breathe. Then I learned that they were not opening up my emails because they were afraid that I was going to have them drop everything and breathe. So I resorted to some, stealth trickery and creativity, but learned that to do this kind of work, you have to perhaps not do it as often. But the great thing about this was this practice led to some wonderful discussions on the fear of practice. Other engaging practices include ending the gathering with an exploration that might be suggested for the group to use or investigate before we meet again, like keeping a journal or committing to a specific practice for the next month. And in order to keep people on track, I would send out no more than 2 email reminders at that to make sure that they were keeping those journal entries or doing regular practice. Also, I would email articles from time to time that would be of interest. And I would also offer information on webinars, conferences, and workshops. And it's also nice to invite guest facilitators. And when I do that, I include information, readings, and videos to offer additional insights into the guest facilitators' work. So I'm available for questions on this next section.
So I'll just give people a few moments to enter in any last minute questions. We were receiving quite a few while you were going through your slides, Stephanie. So,
Okay.
So one question that I actually see come up a lot that has come up here is to say a little bit more about the relationship between self-care and contemplation, as it's often overlooked in higher ed, and that I think this sort of ties into what you were just talking about, that there can sometimes be a sense of fear around self-care or practice. And so how do you engage with the cultural pressures which make contemplation difficult within higher education?
I think that when people came to our circle initially, self-care was the last thing on their mind. And I offered initially practices that many times took them out of their comfort level. We danced, we sang, we played. Um, we remembered to laugh. Um, I think when we are talking about self-care, that we assume that it requires some sort of action that is clearly defined. And I think in academia, because everything we do is so clearly defined, that we believe that self-care must be something that looks like taking a walk or going to the gym or going for a run. Um, but what I did, what I attempted to do, and what I think occurred with time, is that we found space to just be together, and that the way we were together was through a shared need for joy. Actually, I mean, I think we are in an academic environment that joy is like the last thing that comes to mind. Um, that we could draw and that we could sing and dance, I think, played a major role in the reason why this group became so important, and a reason to recall why we needed this in our life. So it's not as prescribed as one might think. One time, I think I had my group in a circle, and we did I told everybody to prance like goats. And they did. And we laughed, and we made goat noises, and we moved, and then we came out of that. It was a series of storytelling activities that were based on our being able to let go. So I believe that that is the essence, at least for me, of the importance of self-care and how it might look. It might look different for everyone and how they may want to engage in it, but that's how I engage in self-care.
That was a great story. And the next
Yes, you should
question,
have seen it.
the next question is sort of related. Does your group explore moving beyond self-care into community care or social change?
Oh yes, that was our that's what we've been looking at our second year together. That we are looking at how justice, the role that justice plays in what we do, and we had several discussions on how we address specific issues in the school, and after a while we came up with that what we wanted to do was address the issue of hunger on our campus, and how do we address hunger, and how do we address what our students need as opposed to what we think they need. You know, what is food that they will eat, and what is food that we think they should be eating, and what does that mean. And but when you're hungry, eating something that's familiar um, is better than not eating something because it's unfamiliar. So we had a lot of deep discussions about that, and struggled with our own understanding of what it means to be hungry, and what it means to be hungry when you're an 18-year-old. So we have attempted and are working on how we better serve um, from a deep, uh, empathetic, compassionate, and contemplative point of view. Um, and we will, and I guess as we move into our third year, that might be a part of what we do, but also we will be engaging in creating student communities, and hopefully uh, addressing the needs of our student communities by being present with them through practice, and working with them through practice to have a better understanding of what their needs are, and how we can, if nothing else, be present to what our students have to say.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I think that actually we'll have that be the last question for this section, and hopefully we'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to go back to some more questions when we've finished.
Okay. All right. So maintaining a loving and compassionate environment. Another way I might phrase this is, how do we deal with interpersonal challenges? First, I think it's important to know who has a practice and to define what practice is. And I think the tree is helpful in that. But many of us think of this idea of contemplative pedagogy or contemplative work as meditation and yoga. But we have a diverse group at my school, and some who have Buddhist practice, some who come from strong Christian backgrounds, and from a number of religious or nature-focused beliefs. So as I said earlier, I find it important to share the contemplative tree as a guide to understanding the variety of practices, and to let the group know that practice is personal and unique and creative, and that this community is a safe space to share and experiment with new ideas. I would imagine that there could be conflicts around the idea of practice, but I have found that we haven't experienced any of that. I would like to think that if the space is held in a way that, quote, you walk along with them without judgment, sharing their journey to an unknown destination, end quote, and that their, quote, stories are heard, contained, and transcend time, end quote, that difference becomes what it is and not the issue. So I know that we're running a little our time. So I will open it up for a few more questions, I think.
Okay, so I think we'll just do maybe 2 or 3 questions at this point, and then hopefully we can share the questions with you at a later time. So let's see. Sorry, some of them were sort of answered through your talk. So I think one question that would be helpful for folks to hear is what has been your experience in keeping people involved, and how do you get them to take on some of the organizational tasks for the community to keep it going?
I find with my group that I don't have to do much. I just reach out and they rally. And I suppose that has a lot to do, and I hope it has a lot to do with the fact of holding space and being open to ideas. When we had our retreat, we had a full day retreat in the mountains. Um, Everybody just pitched in. I didn't have to do much. I mean, we had way too much. And we did cater our lunch, but breakfast was brought by the group. The group was just there and ready and willing and wanting to share and do more. I think our biggest challenge might be how we maintain a long-term projects such as we have a regular kind of food pantry donation that we do to our food pantries, and how do we maintain that ongoing monthly project where our intention is to make sure that we uh, when we shop, our shopping is specifically for our students, that our students are all that are on the forefront of what we're doing, in the forefront of what we're doing. And that has been sort of challenging, I think, for the group, because I asked them that we all just go shopping one day a month, that all we're shopping for are our students. So that is our focus. And that has been a little challenging because they said, well, that takes a little time. And of course, my theory is, well, that's what practice is. It's that moment where we take that hour out of 1 hour out of the month to have our focus be on one thing, have our intention be set in a way that there are no other distractions. So, so I think sometimes it's the idea of practice. Those are the challenges. Our biggest, well, how do you maintain practice, and what does that mean? And hopefully that answers the question a bit.
Thanks so much. So the last and final question that I'll read aloud for the webinar is about students and how, if the students have a sense of what your group is doing and how they're responding to the process.
I think what we know right now is what's happening in the classroom space. Those of us in our group who have chosen to begin incorporating contemplative practices in our classroom, that's where we're seeing some impact, or at least students recognizing that something is different. I recently did beholding practice based on a series of PowerPoints that our students did on difficult issues in our society and how we had to sit with these images. And I talked a little bit about what it means to behold. I don't necessarily go deeply into the idea that this is contemplative practice, although I did explain this idea of beholding and what it means to behold and sit with something. So I think the students are, when they do respond, they are responding to the fact that I like the quiet time. I like when we are drawing, because I can get quiet, or we're doing collages, it's nice to be quiet. It's nice to settle in. Or when our students are, we have a teacher that actually started classes with play. So she would actually bring bouncy balls and have them, do bouncy ball races at the beginning of class. And then they were ready, because it was an evening class and they were tired, and they were, to just be energized by something as simple as play. So I think we are seeing our students understand that something is happening and they're feeling it. I don't know. It will be curious as we move on, especially in our third year, and we create student groups, see how that is different, and how that might have a new and different impact on them.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. So I think that's the end of the question and answer session.
Okay. So I will just end with so anyway, if you're interested in more information on at least developing the first phases of building a contemplative community on your college campus, you can always contact me at bestillmove@mail.com. And also, I think that Maya will be sending me your questions as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want you to know I'd like to share the questions with the contemplative community group we'll be meeting in 2 weeks. So that perhaps I can share some really interesting insights from them as well. And also, if here's some information on creating contemplative practice workshops or retreats, and you can always check that out on my Be Still Move site. And I just want to thank you all and for joining me, and recognizing the value of having no control.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing your work with us, and thank you all for joining us and sticking through our technical difficulties. I do want to just remind everyone that's still on the call that this webinar has been recorded, and it will be available on our website soon. Our webinars are made possible by your support, and we invite you to make a donation and check out our webinar archive at www.contemplativemind.org. You may not be aware of this since we have such a wide reach, but in actuality, the Center for Contemplative Mind is just 3 full-time staff members. So your donations really do make a huge difference no matter what the size. And lastly, I'd like to take a moment to remind you that we are accepting proposals to present at our 10th annual ACMHE conference in October here in Massachusetts. You can read the full CFP and learn more about the conference at www.acmheconference.org. Thank you all so much for listening and being with us today. Be well and enjoy your weekend.